What's up, good people? Oh, how's everybody doing? Tough task right now, and I know for certainty that I'm not the most qualified person to speak on behalf of Claude Humphrey. But dang it, at this point, I'm tired of having other people waiting around to do the work. So we welcome everyone here. Jamarius or Jamaris sends his love to the family. You might notice I'm not as energetic right now because I'm kind of suffering some sort of illness, but we're fine. I'm good. The show will go on. I'm just a bit tired is all. So, as we welcome some more people here. As you may know, this big guy right here is going to be the topic of discussion for a while. So, let me start where, well, kind of the only place that I can start. How's it going, CK? Jamerus, thanks for your advice. Might end up taking it. But, yeah. I mean, I didn't really hear the news about this until this morning, even though it happened yesterday. So it might have been later in the night. As you may know, he passed at the age of 77. So had a nice fulfilled life. He, obviously got to witness himself being inducted in the Hall of Fame back in 2014, which I think was very much long overdue. But we're going to get into that in just a little bit. I first want to talk about his time over back in Tennessee State. He went to that school for a couple of reasons. One was that he just wanted to get the education needed. He liked football at the time, but that wasn't his main focus. He kind of had to go to this type of school because, well, racism was still, it still is a thing now, but it was more prevalent back then, especially in the South. He had heard reports of other teams saying, like other schools and whatnot, they were saying that, hey, if you sign with us, you can play on our program, but we're probably going to get a lot of other teams disqualifying or like forfeiting the game because they don't want to face you because you're black. That's the kind of stuff that he had to deal with being over there. Had his coach Gilliam. He really liked being there. And, 4 years was able to go to the kind of like the all senior team or like the Senior Bowl now. And it was there that he actually got to be underneath Coach Norm Van Brocklin. Now, Norm would later get the job as the head coach of the Falcons after spending some time over in Minnesota. And whew, that guy was a character. When Claude was drafted back in 1968, he was the 3rd overall pick, and he honestly was surprised that he was selected by the Falcons. The reason that was the case was because at the time there wasn't really any Falcon scouts over at the colleges, and he was never really contacted by the team. He was kind of thinking, well, maybe I can go to like the Chiefs or maybe like the Eagles or something. No, instead, 3rd overall selection, ended up getting called by the Falcons. He actually got like woken up because he was like staying in his dormitory at the time, and Yeah, I found out there. But I mean, he obviously took the chance and made the step up to the pros. His first game was probably one of his most memorable games, even though it wasn't a statistically memorable moment for us as a Falcons fan, as the game was against the Vikings in Week 1 in 1968, and we got blown out 47-7. But that was one of his better games, actually. The reason I say that is because, well, statistics aren't really like they weren't really prevalent back in those times. They didn't really track sacks. They considered them as tackles, and I don't really have an accurate description of what the tackles were like back in 1968 or anywhere else for that matter. As a matter of fact, they didn't really track these kind of things until 1982, where they made the differentiation. Um, and his career, he retired in '81, so all of his actual counting stats are kind of unofficial. But that being said, he's been credited for 130 sacks. In comparison, that's more than Dwight Freeney. That's more than Derek Thomas. As a matter of fact, let me show you this picture, and it gives you the list. It's kind of small, but it gives you the list of all 24 members that are ahead of him. He's quite possibly like the 25th best pass rusher of all time. Which is why it's really insane to me that it took 30 years in order to let him be recognized by the Pro Football Hall of Fame. How's it going, man? But, this ain't really much about me. So as you take a look at that list, you can see a lot of the, legendary players up there. I know some people aren't Hall of Famers yet that are above him, guys like Jared Allen and whatnot. Well, I mean, their careers are kind of still recent, but I was really surprised at this, to know that it took him this amount of time in order to get recognized by the league. But, he's a Falcon, so who the heck is going to pay attention to us? Speaking of which, back in those days, I don't have a script for any of this, by the way. Speaking of this, from 1968 all the way until 1970, I want to say. That was his last year with Atlanta. He spent 3 more seasons in Philly. Yeah, we suffered a lot of losing. A lot of losing. And it got to a lot of the long-standing veterans that were on the team. Even back in 1977, one of the best defenses of all time, we were still 7-7, because even though our defense allowed 15 touchdowns that entire season in a 14-game stretch, our offense only scored 20 touchdowns total. It was not good. And some of the other quarterbacking years, they were even worse than that. So you had a lot of losses, a lot of just terrible losses at that too. I mean, obviously, like, if you're going to be an expansion team, you're not going to be really good. But even in a year like 1977 or like 1976, for example, I think that was the first year for the like Tampa Bay and like Seattle Seahawks. I remember one game against them where, yeah, like the Seahawks, they only won one game in that season, and that was against Tampa, who went 0-26 as the start of their expansion franchise. And yeah, we went into their stadium. We weren't doing all that great either, but it was just a matter of pride at that point. And the fact that we got blown out, the score at one point was like 30-7. It was at these moments in these veterans' careers, like Tommy Nobis, for example. This was his last year as a Falcon, Mr. Falcon himself. And that game, he actually left early because he just couldn't handle it. All of that kind of it gets to you mentally. It gets you in a mental rut when you're just constantly losing, and not only that, but you're doing it in such a fashion like you can't even be proud to play the sport, even though like you're going to try your absolute hardest. And it's guys like these that really need to be appreciated for giving it their best, even though they have that feeling within them that they're probably not going to do much. It didn't take until he got to Philly where he actually had like the ability to go to the playoffs. Tommy Nobis never had that. So it's these kind of situations where you appreciate all that they've done, even though there isn't a whole lot of stats to back it up. Like I said, he's got 130 sacks to his name. That's 3.5 more. That's 3.5 away from John Abraham, another legendary pass rusher. He had 2 first-team All-Pros, 6 Pro Bowls. He was in the draft class of like Larry Zonka and Ken Stabler and all these other guys. He was one of 8 Hall of Famers in his draft class. He had one of the longer seasons out of all of them. So it was quite possibly one of the most meaningful draft selections in that class. And that's including some of the other Hall of Famers too. It's players like this that really make you wonder, like, hey, where is everyone else at? Where are some of the other players that we should be acknowledging and appreciating a little bit more? Because unfortunately, the Falcons really haven't had that history of supporting some of their veterans and supporting some of their former players. So when I'm seeing that Claude Humphrey from the standpoint of like the official YouTube channel of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and all they got to say about him is a 90-second clip, that lets you know that, yeah, I'm sure they weren't expecting this, but they didn't really have anything in the books for him either. And that was kind of like the tipping point for me. I was like, all right, come on. This just isn't it. Of everything that he had to struggle through, the fact that his wife had passed away a year before he was inducted. So he didn't even get this feeling that you're seeing on the screen. He didn't even get to enjoy that with his high school sweetheart that he met in his junior year. It's just, it's ridiculous. When we're paying attention to tomorrow's game, you got to understand that even though we're kind of rooting for today's Falcons, this is still the home of the legends that played here before us. This is still Claude Humphrey's Falcons. This is still Tommy Nobis's Falcons. This is still Jesse Tuggle's Falcons. And if you can't appreciate them, then I don't know what to tell you. Excuse me for just a moment. All right, sorry about that. Some family members were coming in. Oh, and you know how the dogs get. Someone else that I want to bring up, and he isn't really linked to Claude, but he was in the same draft class. He's also a Hall of Famer in the same draft class and at the same position. Let me tell you about a guy by the name of Elvin Bethea. Now, Elvin Bethea was drafted by the Houston Oilers in the third round of the same draft class. He is also a Hall of Famer, but he played in 29 less games and has 25 less sacks compared to Claude. Yet he got in the Hall of Fame 11 years before him. I'm sorry, but what? The fact that like certain things like that happens, it's just you don't want to be used to this stuff. Sometimes life just doesn't give you a choice. And it's this taste out of our mouths that we have to get rid of and just wipe off. And I know that, a lot of the college football lovers, they also had a struggle today. But this was something that I needed to talk about a little bit more, that I felt was more of a pressing issue. Because I mean, like I said, who the heck else is gonna talk about this? Am I the person to speak up on this? I know I'm not. But at the same time, like I said before, I'm tired of waiting around for other people to have to do this kind of stuff and then disappoint me later on. So if I'm going to be disappointed by a video about Claude Humphrey and showing this appreciation for him, it might as well be myself. Obviously no one can be prepared for this, and no one should for that matter, but it just goes down to appreciating who you have and who you've rooted for in the past. Because at the end of the day, this is the only life you're given that we know of. And the fact that he had to change his life in order to give to the city of Atlanta, it really makes you wonder, what other sacrifices have other players made in the past in order to be an Atlanta Falcon? What other sacrifices have people made in order to try to give it their best, just for us to forget about them a couple of years later? Stuff like this is a tough pill to swallow, but it's one that I think that we're not going to have a choice in. One of the best pass rushers of all time, and he barely gets a passing mention. That's just sad. All right. Now that I've had my 20 minutes, I don't mean to give you guys whiplash, but let's talk about tomorrow morning's game. Yeah, a bit more nasally than I should be, but we're fine. Whew. One thing that I want to bring up first is Yeah, people have mentioned it, but I think there's some more people that should probably get a little bit more appreciation than they have. Um, One person I want to shout out first is Drew Dahlman. You know, in a game where you're switching out centers against at the time the number 3 ranked defense in terms of stopping the run. Yeah, that was Jacksonville, by the way. They've actually had better stretches more of games more recently than Tampa Bay in terms of stopping the run. Because Tampa Bay was phenomenal at stopping the run in like the first 5 games. More recently, though, you know, they've kind of shifted that around. And then they were recently, you know, averaging like 120 yards a game. So it really makes you think. The reason as to why I want to praise Drew Dahlman a little bit more is because he's had less time in order to get that chemistry and to get that communication with the other players, with the other offensive linemen, and, you know, with Matt. You know, it's one thing to have a different center in the game and not lose like the communication about them. So like the fact that he'll have the same memory and retention of the playbook, so that, you know, like the center's not failing the offense. But it's also the fact that he's a rookie. You know, Matt Hennessy, he's had more time to spend with guys like Jake Matthews and Chris Lindstrom and Caleb McGarry. You know, right now, Drew Dahlman, with his very limited snaps that he's had so far, he stepped in and ran this offense, and most of us barely even knew. So, a big shout out to him. You know, making sure that he gets his due diligence and praise. Because a lot of people are going to say, well, how are you going to run against Tampa Bay? So I wanted to figure that out. You know, I mentioned this before in the Indy game, but Jonathan Taylor had one drive where he just had like all of the yards. He had like 60 something yards in the same drive, because all they did on that one drive, and like the last drive of the game for them, they just ran the ball and they kept doing it and it kept working. Part of that could be the reason as to like, well, I'm pretty sure the defensive line was tired, but how did they get tired? Well, is because the Colts just kept throwing the ball. When you throw the ball, you're prone to make this defensive line move more and work harder. That way, instead of just having to plug up some holes, they had to get to the quarterback. So, what can we do about that? Well, I remember the last time we faced them, we had a couple of successes when it came to running screen passes. Do we try that again in order to try to tire out the defensive line, so that by the time where we need to stick to the run game, which Arthur Smith has been known to do that, you know, we're actually able to a little bit better? Like I said, there's going to be quite a number of people on the Tampa Bay sidelines that are not going to be able to play. You know, does that come into effect? You know, well, how do we keep throwing the ball now? Well, last time they really couldn't cover Kyle Pitts when they were more healthy. You know, and like I said, if they struggle with Jack Doyle, what do you think they're going to do with Kyle Pitts? And last time we didn't have, and you know, last time we had Ridley, but Russell Gage just stepped up a little bit. He's kind of had no choice to. We got a lot more confidence in Cordell Patterson than week 2. We got a lot more confidence in our offensive line than week 2. We got a lot more confidence in our defense than week 2. So when you add all these elements together, you know that we fixed up our special teams issues too. What can Tampa do now? You know, they have Leonard Fournette, which is tough to tackle, but he's also fumble prone. You know, they got Gronk, which is also tough to tackle, but his strength is more so helping out the ground game than it is helping out the receiving game. Now, I know that he had a lot better of a game, you know, in the last game against Indy and against us as well. Like I said, our defense is a lot smarter. And when you're playing smarter, you're playing more confident. And when you're playing more confident, you're playing with a mindset to win. When you play with a mindset to win, most likely you're going to win. Oh, hey, a comment. Like, you sly dogs, you got me monologuing again. Anyways, the real says we have to get up or score enough early. You know, and I do believe that. I do believe having the momentum on our side definitely helps us out. But as we've seen in previous games and in more recent games, it's more so what to do at the end of the game than rather at the beginning. You know, because what I imagine us doing is we're going to try to pass the ball and hopefully they can stop it. They're probably going to be more prone to allowing us to pass because they want to be run heavy. You know, and knowing that we have a coach that doesn't care what the scoreboard is, he's going to try to run the ball, which in some instances that's an advantage, but that can also be a disadvantage. Dirty Birdie says, don't take the foot off of gas. Again, I also agree. But, you know, Real was saying, hey, like, get our foot on the gas right now. Go full throttle. And he also has this to ask. He says, what do you think about more no tempo or more up tempo probably and or no huddle? You know, at this point in the season, I can kind of agree with that. You know, one of our biggest things that we can do against Tampa Bay is tire them out. So if we do that and have these long lasting drives, you know, this is the type of season for us where we are more prone to score in the red zone. So if we get there, we're going to be a lot better at finishing these drives. And knowing that we have the run support in the goal line to help with that as well, that's a huge difference for a passing offense. Because the second that you make sure that your offense looks the same, regardless of whether or not you run or pass, that is the biggest benefactor for you. CK22 says, just glad to have CP back. They can't account for him and Kyle Pitts. One or the other is bound to go off tomorrow. I agree. Like I said, they struggled with tight ends this year. But everybody also says can't because the wide receivers not getting open. And then he also asks, will Hayden Hurst play? Well, he's currently on IR. So there's that. But about the wide receivers not getting open, you know what? Let me check. It's the one thing I definitely needed to check that I probably should have checked before I started the stream, but it didn't really cross my mind until right now. I'm just verbally stalling right now as I look up their injury report today. All right, who they have scheduled out? All right, so Jordan Whitehead is out. I mean, we already know the situation about Mike Edwards. he then got suspended. Jamel Dean is questionable with the shoulder. And there's a couple of other people that are kind of like game day answers. So yeah, interesting stuff. But whew, game's coming up tomorrow. And making sure that we feel good about ourselves, you know. Let me guys ask you this: Is Antonio Brown? Absolutely. Like I said, him and Mike Edwards and another Bucs wide receiver, they were all suspended for carrying fake IDs, which is 3 games long, and yeah, I don't think that's enough. But when you compare it to other stuff, like Aaron Rodgers suspension, which is like 1 game, and then some other stuff that happened in the past, it's it's really inconsistent with how they like treat these players when it comes to discipline. But yeah, Antonio Brown is definitely not playing. That being said, I'm expecting a lot of matchups where they try to put AJ Terrell on Mike Evans. I know he doesn't travel, but I think you got to flip the defense a little bit just to make sure, just to compensate that, hey, like we can't get him going off early because he is a very annoying wide receiver. He's going to get all sorts of like holds and whatnot. No one's going to bat an eye on the sideline, especially whenever we've played at our own home games. You better believe that the refs aren't going to be on our side, which is why I'm saying, hey, the BS meter is going to be completely up. But, you know, at least we know with them, you know. The Real says our offense has a chance to score with Patterson on the field. You know, and on the flip side, hey, if there's one stat that you can hold high, it's going to be that we've never allowed a big play against us, and that's what Tampa Bay is really known for. They're known for causing a lot of big plays, and they're known for having about 24 turnovers, which is about 4th in the league. So, you know, Real is also saying Gage and Zacchaeus have to make some plays, hopefully a few deep targets. I mean, we tried that last time. It didn't really work out then because we didn't have the time for Matt Ryan to throw deep. But I do like the idea that we're trying to push back the safeties a little bit more, keeping their defense honest. You know, probably causing their corners to play back more. So that allows a little bit more separation when it comes to getting your receivers open. You know, making sure that they don't have to struggle a whole lot against press coverage or against bump and run. Because when they're not, you know, when they don't really deal with that, you know, they can make the catch because Matt Ryan can make it easier for them to catch. So that's the one advantage of that. And when it comes to, you know, Matt Ryan himself, I mentioned this before, but he is surprisingly, believe it or not, but you can look it up for yourself because Pro Football Focus, for what they're worth, they're the ones that made this thing. But yeah, they said that Matt Ryan on throws 10 plus yards or greater. I guess that's what 10 plus means, dude. 10 yards or greater. He's been the most accurate quarterback, beating out guys like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert and all these other guys. Every quarterback in the league is counted on this list. The guy that's been the most accurate this season, 10 yards or more, has been Matt Ryan. Now whether or not that counts for his completion percentage, that's completely up to the receivers at that point. But we know that Matt Ryan is known for making these catchable passes. You know, so that, like, I shouldn't have to worry about that. Shane Elliott. Well, who do we have the Falcons getting in the draft? I I've had my own conversations. We've had our own discussions on here about like this draft board that we've made. Yeah, coming off there, but yeah, like we've talked about it at length, even. Like what position would I draft if I was in charge? What I would try to get in free agency. When you take a look at everything as far as like contracts, the value of the position, the depth you can get on like the free agent list, who would be available there, what can we sign with the little money that we're given, and the biggest needs that we have when it comes to playing on offense and defense. Now, this was made a couple weeks ago, and I feel like in certain positions we've kind of like improved in some areas, but we're still up in the air about like the depth as far as like nose tackle is concerned, as far as like wide receiver is concerned, as far as like the defensive ends are concerned. And don't even get me started on those outside linebackers, because there ain't none. Let me get this off here. So Dalman and Hennessy are rotating for either run or pass plays. If they could open lanes to running backs or buying Matt time to pass against the Bucks front seven. Oh yeah, and like I said, like there's offensive strategies to make that happen. Shane brings up the point. It's like I think they only have 20 million in cap for next year. Yeah, and then you got to think about who you could re-sign as well, and the money that would go to that. The drafts, your own draft selections. If you want us to have a lot more draft picks than we have, that's going to offer a lot of trading back, but that's also going to be a lot more money that you're going to be distributing to each player. So certain teams could do that a little bit more. They can have that strategy because they had the money for it, not necessarily because they had a lot of needs that they needed to fill. It's just more so that, well, I can afford these players. I can afford about 10 or 12 players to get in the draft. Whereas with us, we could barely afford the 9 that we got. So is 20 million enough in order to compensate, in order to try to keep this team together? I don't think so. But I would really love to be proven wrong. So, yeah, but back to the offensive strategies. It would be nice in order for us to do more stuff on the outside, on the sidelines. Get these big guys up in the middle moving, because once you get a lot of these guys like moving, like Vita Vea, try to get him just huffing and puffing by the time the fourth quarter comes around. So, Shane Elliott bringing up that name again. Try to get Jordan Davis if they can. I might be one of the few people that actually disagrees. But like I said, like it all comes down to what our offseason program is by the time the draft happens. If we end up not having any nose tackles because we couldn't get back Anthony Rush and Mike Pennell, I'd absolutely agree. But you also got to wonder, if you take Ridley off the team, we only have Frank Darby as a wide receiver that we can expect to have next year. I'm sorry, but that ain't going to be good enough. So whether or not you want to invest in the top receiver in the draft, probably wait down the line. Because, let's face it, like a lot of these number one overall selections, when it comes to the receiver, they're very wishy-washy. Sometimes you can end up with Jamar Chase or like a Justin Jefferson, but then other times you can end up with like a Jalen Reagor or a remember Kevin White? That's a name. But yeah, I always like to be wrong when it comes to if it means good things for the Falcons. So yeah, like that's all I'm trying to bring up. Like there's a lot of different scenarios. You know, if we didn't trust like the center position, for example, I'd try to look for a good center because those are hard to come by. But now we don't really have to worry about that, at least for a little bit. It's kind of like it's been kind of like a duct tape fix at the position. Just say, hey, just throw everyone that we have outside out on the field, see what they do. If there's no drop off in play and it's actually really good, you know, stick to what works, even if it's unconventional. So when I go O-line, like I said, I pulled it up. Hmm, maybe I'm just like making I'm probably contradicting myself now that I'm thinking about it again. So what this chart ended up becoming was a combination of a lot of other people's opinions. You know, because on here I had the first three picks being like wide receiver, defensive end, and corner. But then I'd also have us trying to get a couple of positions in free agency as well. You know, one of them also being a wide receiver because of how pressing the need is there. You know, another safety would be nice in order to try to boost up that position group in order to get the depth there because we're not expecting to have Eric Harris. Thankfully, a lot of people would say, and Duron Harmon for that matter. Um, Outside linebackers, you know, as of right now, it's kind of like Ogundeji, and that's about it as far as like who we can expect to have back. So that position group's going to be a little thin. You know, I'd like to have a little bit more of a veteran presence there in the cornerback room. You know, maybe give the other people some pointers in that room in order so that AJ Terrell's not the only person that's doing anything on a consistent basis that good. And then sixth of all, I'd like us to try to get a running back as well. But that's assuming that we have our offensive line fixed first. So if you don't trust the offensive line, which I'd really only have a problem with one position, and we've already kind of established that we can fix that position if we trust in the people that we did last year, which was like Matt Gono and whatever. Because like we still have access to them. You know, real got to bring up a good point about, like I said, keeping the guys that we're not expecting to have back. One of them being Isaiah Oliver. Another one is, well, either Devo or Foye, either one of the two. We might have to sacrifice one of them. So honestly, like the presence of Michael Walker in that game, although he missed a couple of tackles, he looked overall good. I seen more good than bad from him. So that's a step up, considering that was his first start at that position. Yeah, you think that kid from Mississippi, I think his name is Sam Williams, can be a steal in the third or fourth round pick, a defensive end or outside linebacker. I think that, that fits right there with the mold of who we can get there. Like I said, our depth is just almost non-existent there. So although, we can appreciate the eye candy that is Jordan Davis at the moment, if we keep Anthony Rush and Mike Pennell, which are already cheap to begin with, and they're already performing, they already understand the defense. As a matter of fact, they're going to have a better understanding of it moving forward if they come back. They're going to be able to play a lot more smarter than they are right now. And that's only speaking good things for them now. So Jordan Davis is the Georgia eye candy once again. But I'd say, I'd argue he's not the biggest need. Not this offseason. So, but yeah, I could probably pay attention to Sam Williams if that is his name, or I'll just look up that kid from Mississippi. See whatever kind of results I get from that. But yeah, yeah. David says playing the nose tackle, but like I said, so is Anthony Rush and whatnot. I understand the appeal of having him over Tyler Davison. That's for dang sure. Yeah, that definitely exists. But you'd end up with like one wide receiver and one outside linebacker on your roster. That's not going to cut it. And, you know, we haven't even talked about Cordero Patterson that needs to be resigned as well. So, you know, like a lot of things are up in the air. Like Davis, he is a big boy. He definitely is a heckin' chunker. But as the real realist would suggest, he says wide receiver, running back, corner, defensive end, offensive lineman. Again, I'd have no issue with that. That's if we weren't able to get like Cordero Patterson back, or if we couldn't sign literally any of the wide receivers that we have right now. Because I think if you have Cordero Patterson back, Kyle Pitts learns more. Oh, I'm sorry. Score Daryl Patterson back. That kind of negates the need for a number one threat. You just need a number two and a number three. And if Kyle Pitts can be the number two, then you're really just kind of looking for a third or fourth option that's more consistent. I think in today's NFL, having three or four weapons right now is a lot more crucial than it was in the past. You know, I took a look at like the Bengals offense, for example. They can sweater at times, but when they need to score, they can definitely score. And they have three or four weapons to do so. And everyone else around them, they they can step up when necessary. Can we be that offense? I think we're going to have to be. You know, I think we're going to have that one, two, three, then four guys deep in that rotation. And it also helps to know that, hey, if one of them goes down to an injury, which is kind of, you know, let's face it, it's likely going to happen. It is, it is football. People do get hurt here. But yeah, it adds some depth. But I'm also still kind of thinking of the theme. You know, if you know me, you know that I've kept that alone. That's only for Ridley to answer. None of us ain't qualified. I ain't him. I'm not a close associate of him or of anyone else in the organization of the team. So, you know, I'm sorry to keep giving these non-answers, but it's really not for me to answer. So, you know, and it's not for me to speculate either. It's not for me to jump to conclusions and try to say, well, if no one's saying this, then it must mean this and this and this and this kind of bad stuff. Can't be there to say it. So I will have one thing. Yeah, he was supposed to be a Pro Bowler. I will have one thing to say though. Oh, I guess maybe CK22 beat me to it. Being that Pease has the ability to produce with lower tier talent, would you prioritize our top pick on an offensive playmaker? I know it depends on how the draft falls, but I'm curious on your thoughts. Well, like I said, having that third or fourth offensive weapon is going to be really crucial in today's offense. Um, so I have to say if Ridley comes back, would you get a wide receiver in the first round? Yes. Like I said, having four guys there as a threat on the offensive side of the ball is necessary. All the people that are up at the top, they have 3 or 4 guys that they can trust in order to get the ball in their hands. Like at the Cardinals, for example. And that just goes into their complementary football. These guys are like 5 or 6, 7 players deep. Up to the point where James Conner is in the question as like one of the best running backs in the league. So when it comes to utilizing talent, I think we need to have another fear factor on this offense. Because the fear factor that we can provide on defense will be Dean Pease himself. And the confidence that our whole unit will play as a result of being with him for a lengthy amount of time. So the scarier that offense is, the more of a cohesive unit the defense becomes, that's when we're going to be at our scariest. And making sure that we win these games that we're supposed to win, even though people doubt us. Having those wins underneath your belt, it makes you feel good going into the next season, knowing that, hey, this is something to build off of, and we didn't even have X, Y, and Z on our roster to help us out to get those extra wins there. We were still a couple of plays away in order from beating some of these other opponents that we lost to. So could that be the case this time around? I hope not. But again, the game hasn't been played yet. But knowing that good old BS meter that Tom Brady keeps up with him at all times, especially as we get into like December games, it is going to skyrocket now. So this is going to be the test in order for us to try to force ourselves to play the best football we've ever had this season. Obviously the team is excited in order to talk about, playing meaningful games in December, as much as a lot of people want to disagree. It's a good change of pace because we haven't had that in a little bit. I don't even think this YouTube channel existed back in those times when we were able to play some more meaningful games in this month. So, yeah, those are my thoughts there. Overall, I will have one last question to say. What are you afraid of happening? Or that makes sense? I don't think so. I don't even know, man. I'm so tired. But what are you afraid of? Maybe I can give you some tips there. It's like, hey, like if this happens in this game, then I know that we're screwed. What's something that we can think of? And this, I'm probably just going to leave it at this. Yeah, in regards to tomorrow's game, like what are you afraid of having? I don't even know how to word this question. But okay, so like Jammers, for example, he's saying I'm afraid of more injuries happening during the game. Like, hey, if an injury happens, then we're screwed. So I think this speaks about the lack of depth on some crucial positions. Shanelia says, do you think the Falcons should just have a sell and try to get all the draft picks and sell off their big contracts and have a lot of rookie contracts? Jeez, that was a mouthful. Okay, so I don't know what this would say about the mentality of the front office with this type of move. I think if you kind of pull a stunt like this off and not have any consideration for the players that you've been having on your roster that has played their heart out and played their contracts out, has there been a long list of those people happening? Maybe, maybe not. But the point is, you might lose trust as a coach and as a front office if you try to pull too many stunts off in one offseason and don't have a theme to it. If your theme is just being cheap for the purposes of being cheap, I'm sorry, but that's not going to give me any motivation to want to play for you. And if you're trying to bank on one singular draft, is this the type of draft to do that? I don't know. But I wouldn't be confident in the fact that, hey, if we just get a bunch of picks in the draft, then that's going to solve all of our issues. Because some of them is just a matter of depth. It's not a matter of just like who's starting. You know, like people were worried about like the left tackle position and the quarterback position moving forward. Because we haven't had to worry about those positions as a starter for a while. But moving forward, what are the timetables on certain positions? What are the timetables on the middle linebacker position? What are the timetables on having Grady Jarrett? So just having rookie contracts, if you want to be cheap, where do you try to be cheap at? Because the people that have been good, some of them haven't been expensive either. You know, Cordell Patterson's on a cheap deal. Lee Smith is on a cheap deal. Some of these rookies that are already balling out and playing too, but that didn't take until much later in the season. Okay, so CK saying I just don't want another game where offense can't get anything going at all. I'm worried about putting I'm worried of an outing similar to that of against Philly, Dallas, and New England. So with Philly, the bleeding really occurred in the fourth quarter when it was like 5 minutes left to go. That's where a lot of their scoring came from. Because for a long time in that game, it was like 15-6. Like it was still a winnable game if we just put our mind to it, but we didn't have the roster at the time or the chemistry in order to put that game together. Dallas just all happened in one quarter. You know, and it wasn't even the fourth. It was the second quarter where they just had all of the points happen. You know, and that was just demoralizing. With New England, again, a lot of their scoring didn't happen until much later in the game. Because for a while it was like 10-0, 13-0. It was still a winnable game as long as you just try to put some of the pieces together. Just go back to the basics, if you will. The real saying, I'm afraid of vanilla play calling leading us to turnovers and afraid of defense not being able to cover Gronk and Evans. All right, so with the vanilla play calling, I would say you may not have to worry about that, but it's kind of like the vanilla execution. Sometimes it's not so much the decision that's like the problem, but it's more so the result. But every once in a while, I'll get mad at the decision because when you've been in the same situation, you tried that once before and it didn't work, and then you tried it again, and then it didn't work. Like that's when I can be afraid of the decision making. But as far as the result goes, I not a whole lot you can speak on that. But leading us to turnovers, the only turnover that I would be worried about is like turnover on downs because we're trying to like have all of our drives matter, and then we mess up in the field position that allows Tom Brady to once again have a bunch of short fields. That would be a problem. But I think that being able to trust in our run game in order to pick up these crucial yards, even at a time where our opponent expects us to run the ball there, Being able to do that is one of the biggest components that no one talks about except us. So our defense not being able to cover Gronk and Evans, we have the pieces for it. It's just a matter of getting to Brady physically and a lot quicker of a fashion. Because once you pressure him just as much as any other quarterback has had to face against Tampa's defense, it becomes a lot more even keel of a matchup than you think. Arizona 1 says, aside from re-signing CP, who would you keep with the current running back and fullback roster? Should we try the mid-90s Broncos and just have a stable of solid running backs and fullbacks? Whew. I mean, I wouldn't even go as far as I wouldn't even have to go back as far back as that. You know, another AFC West team that always seems to have good running backs was Kansas City. Not now, of course, because they got the quarterback that they want to rely on heavily. But at the time when Kansas City was really good, you know, they've had like Jamal Charles, they had Larry Johnson, they had Priest Holmes, they had Marcus Allen. Like, they didn't really have a shortage of production there from that position. But yeah, having a stable of solid running backs and fullbacks that is still only as good as the offensive line that's going to play in front of them, though. So if I want to have anything stable there on the offense, it's going to have to be the trenches. All right, so you're saying keep Matt, but try to get picks for the left tackle, Grady Jarrett, Deion Jones, and then maybe try to sell off Ridley. I think we can get some good picks with all them guys and rebuild the team how they want. Like this message, it's kind of telling me two mixed signals here. One of them is like, yeah, build for the future and see if you can do that as fast as possible. But the other side of this is that, you know, screw all the veterans that we had. And you even finished it off by saying, but after Matt's contract or something, go get your quarterback. I still think that it's possible to get the future quarterback when Matt's here. It's just not going to be at the position where you would expect. You know, because if there's going to be one game that I would want to pay attention to right now, it might seem weird, but the one game that I would want to pay attention to this Sunday, outside of our game, is going to be the Eagles and Jets. For the sole purposes that Gardner Minshew is going to be starting for the Eagles. He is their third string quarterback. Right? I think he's their backup now. But he was their third string quarterback. If he plays well, again, and if he's also cheap, has that presence that I feel like we can win with this guy if you give him a good piece, if you give him a good settlement to live in. You know, he's someone that I would look at. You know, would it be like a rookie quarterback in the first round? I don't know. Those are a bit more tricky than you'd imagine, than you might think. But CK saying, I'm not getting rid of Matthews and Jarrett. They are key pieces to us competing now, and would be really tough to replace. Jones and Ridley might not be there though. Yeah, so it's like, how much can you really sell a team on a wide receiver whose life is up in the air? Like Debo, I can see that. With Ridley and then with Grady Jarrett, like he is like I said, like he's our identity of the defense. And Matthews has been, for the longest time, the only thing that's stable on our offensive line since 2014. You know, and heck, who knows? Maybe another quarterback from Alabama can work. I mean, we've already tried an Alabama quarterback in AJ McCarron, but you know, but I mean, I think we've covered. I mean, we've kind of covered all the bases right now. But yeah, final thoughts for anyone else? You know, if there's anything that you'd like to add, you know, regarding Claude Humphrey himself, even if you catch this at a later time, that'd be greatly appreciated. Because I think like more stories like him need to be told across the league in order to appreciate the past. You know, like a lot of people say, if you don't understand the past or if you don't understand history, you can be doomed to repeat it. And our history, oh boy, nothing good. I'll tell you that much. Jake's 29 is just above average. Wow. Okay. I get the money part, but I don't think you're doing him enough justice this season. Because a lot of the because if you're worried about him like not protecting Matt, he's been doing that. If you're worried about him not being disciplined when it comes to like holding penalties and false starts and all that kind of stuff, he's generally been pretty consistent when it comes to those things from not happening. When it comes to running the ball, that's what he believes to be his specialty. So, can you find that immediately? I don't think so. I mean, sure, like him replacing Sam Baker seemed pretty easy, but that's only just a testament to Jake Matthews and that family that he came from. You know, we've also had plenty of other, you know, tackles in the past. You know, one in particular played 17 seasons for us, but only had like 5 winning seasons for us and kind of saw 3 of them in the first like 5 years of his career. You know, so like saying that he's a solid starter, again, I don't know if you're doing him enough justice. Just because he's not getting a whole lot of like highlight reels and a bunch of like people like gawking at him about like that, that doesn't mean that he's not been producing. And as far as his money is concerned, well, you might want to have to get off his back about that because that's what the position entails. If you're good at that position, you're going to get paid a lot of money because that's how important that position is. That is the, you know, that is the second most important position in the sport because you're protecting the quarterback, which is, you know, the most important position in the sport. You know, getting that right helps your team out a lot, but then protecting him is just as important. You know, and you have guys like Joe Theismann and Lawrence Taylor to thank for situations like that. So, again, the fact that Matt Ryan has still been the starter, regardless of you know how many times he's been sacked and whatnot, like the fact that he has remained uninjured for the most part, that's a testament to, well, not just him, but also like his blind side that's being protected by Jake. I don't want to take that away from him. So maybe that's just the way that I see it. But as far as like him remaining disciplined, him understanding his assignments and performing them, like you're at your best when you're not being talked about at all in that position. And the fact that we haven't really had to complain about him shows you he's been doing his job. So there's my appreciation rant about Jake Matthews. But yeah, case in point, left tackles, they're always going to be expensive no matter who you have there. You might as well get a good one. And he's been a good one. Ooh. I mean, sure, maybe down the road. But having a rookie week 1 left tackle, when you still have Matt under center at this point in his career, I don't want to remove that chemistry there. You're going to have to prop that up again. So maybe do that when you have the next quarterback underway too. Can that be done in the same offseason? Well, honestly, with the money that we have, I'm not really sure. But if I'm going to have a lot of money being tied to certain players, they might as well be one of the best that we have on the team. And Matt, Jake, Matthews, Brady, Jarrett, they've been that. But because of what else is around them, they can't be complimented as much because they can't do their job as well because all of them require a cohesive unit. To some extent, So, that being said, though, I might visit, if I'm evaluating Alabama, I might pay attention to Evans. But yeah, that's going to be the show for me. Like I said, say your piece. If you happen to come across any member of the Humphrey family, send them your love and appreciation for them, because they just lost a legend too. But yeah, it's gonna be a really short stream. Like I said, I'm not doing all that great as far as health wise is concerned. When I have I got like bad lung problems, and they only get elevated in the winter, so that just caused a lot more issues with me. She only had one last thing to say. But you're building for the next quarterback. So once you get that guy, the line would be great if you get the right people. Right. But it's all about getting the right people. Right now, at those two positions, we have the right people. We don't need to worry about replacing them. It's just more or less so the depth for later on. We can't worry about later on when we have other holes to fill on the ship. But yeah, really short show in comparison to what I've been doing in the past. But I don't have much of a choice. As you can tell, my voice is significantly, I wouldn't say deep, but it's deeper. Yeah, kind of let you know something. Like I said, I got lung problems. I'm gonna say it because no one cares about this hour, about this point in time in the stream. Like I've had pneumonia and bronchitis before I was even 18. And those weren't detected in me until it was like way too late. So that being said, I have like 45 to maybe on my best days like half my lung capacity right now. Like I said, like when you elevate that in the winter, whew, tough problems are brewing. And it only like increases your chances for getting that kind of stuff later on in your life. You know, they told me that I was like one more like lung problem away from ending up with COPD by the age of 20. I was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So hanging in there. I'm not the guy with the most amount of health problems. I understand that. But if you're wondering about why my voice is different, then this isn't like a bass auto an audio change or whatever, but nah, it's just I kind of like having a deeper voice, but not if it sacrifices my health for it. But anyways, guys, hope you appreciate this. Hope you come down to it. Um, Spread the word that Claude Humphrey definitely needs to be appreciated a little bit more than he has. I want to see a lot of fans in the stadium cheering on for Humphrey and his family, making sure that he gets the representation that he deserves. I know that's a very tall task to ask, man. Um, uh, I think you ain't gotta pray about me. Like I'm taking care and I'm doing my job. I appreciate the concern. Uh, but with the lung condition, there's really no way to get better. You just got to make sure that you're like not decreasing that percentage. But yeah, I mean, it is tough because you really can't find like the appropriate time, especially right now. Like I don't want to make like the end of this kind of stream about me, but it's just I don't know how much of a problem it can be for me later down the road. Like I might, I might miss a stream on a certain day. I don't want that to be the case, but it could happen. And knowing that I don't really have a consistent uh, host on certain days, someone's got to pick up the slack. But I got to keep pushing through it. The show must go on. But yeah, you guys take care of yourselves as well, man. It ain't just me that's going through it. So, anyways, guys, that's gonna be it for me. Appreciate it. Bye.